Hello and welcome to Lynchburg Live. I'm your host, Linda Smith. Tonight's program is the first in a two-part series on forensics and crime scene investigation in the Lynchburg area. My guest tonight is Detective Jonathan Pelletier. He's Senior Crime Analyst with the Lynchburg Police Department. John will be telling us about his job and about crime scene analysis. John, welcome to Lynchburg Live.
It's good to be here. Thank you, Linda.
I'm delighted to have you as a guest. Simply because people are interested in crime scene analysis these days, lots because of television programs they watch. When did you realize that you were first interested in a job in law enforcement?
Well, you know, first interested would go back to when I was supposed to be asleep as a kid. Reading Sherlock Holmes, the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle books really intrigued me, how he could see so much in so little. And you know, that would probably be the spark of when I first got interested. But as I ended up in college and I got a master's, unrelated, I got a cross-cultural degree, unrelated, I talked to my uncle and he said the happiest people are those that can figure out what they do good and wed it to what they like doing. And in college, I learned very quickly. I was a very good investigator. I was catching all kinds, solving all kinds of cases. I wasn't a cop.
Cool. But
I thought, you know what, I'm going to throw my hat in for that, and I'm glad I did.
So when did you decide to branch out into being a crime scene analyst?
Well, after joining the Lynchburg Police Department about 18 years ago, after, by the way, I didn't make it the first time, so for those of you out there that try and don't make it and don't succeed, keep going. I was on a burglary with Ed Goad. He's a lieutenant now that works for Blue Ridge Regional Jail, and we were trying to determine the point of entry. How did this person get in the building? And I said, well, it's not this window. And he looked at me and he said, well, how do you know? And I said, well, if you look, there's this old spider web attached in such a way that if you opened it, it would break the web and you would know he couldn't have gone in that way. He stood back, he said, you ought to look into being an evidence technician. Well, that was the term for it back then, evidence technician. And then later, my commander, Wingfield, who's now Eugene Wingfield, the clerk of court, he pulled me aside coming out of roll call one day and he said, you know, I've been reading your reports and watching your work. You might want to look into it. So after they both told me that, within a few years I applied and didn't even know what I was getting into. Wasn't quite sure. I wanted to be a detective like Sherlock Holmes, but instead CSI, which wasn't very popular back then.
What kind of general educational background do you have to have for something like this? You mentioned college and you said it was unrelated. So
yes, you really, it depends on how far you want to go and what you want to do. In Lynchburg, when we hire somebody on and they're an officer for several years and we bring them into our unit, we send them to the Virginia Forensic Science Academy or we send them to the National Forensic Science Academy. When I went in 2000, I was in the 55th class, the 55th session. And it was a 10-week, very intensive training. They taught you photography, note-taking, sketching, how to testify, how to collect, what to collect, the limitations of the lab, the capabilities of the lab. And that was pretty much the core of my training. Now, since then, I've had loads of other training that has helped and assisted along the way with other types of evidence.
So this was your crime scene analyst background training.
Right.
Okay. Now you're also a certified senior crime scene analyst.
Yeah, isn't that a strange long string of names and letters? I can't keep it straight. I got to look down to see what it is.
What does that mean?
Well, there's 350 in the world that are certified, that hold their certification through IEI, International Association for Identification. They're the most well-received, you know, a creditable organization. And in order to get that, you have to apply. You have to meet the board's requirements. Their requirements are like you've got to be a crime scene person that's involved actively for like 6 years. You've got to be published or be an instructor. You've got to have 144 hours of service, in-service training that's accredited through their board.
Okay.
When you meet all that and they say, okay, you're good for the test, you're given 5 hours to take a 400-question test on 3 books. And once you take that test, you're good for 5 years. Now, after 5 years, if you don't do a whole lot, it expires. You've got to maintain the training, you got to maintain it being active, and then you have to retest in 5 years a different test.
So that's maintaining your certification and
Correct.
Continuing education hours, being a nurse, those things mean a lot to me.
Exactly.
Now, the Lynchburg, as Lynchburg Police Department's senior crime scene analyst, could you give us a sort of a brief overview of what you do?
A little bit of everything. I'm the resident photographer, a resident graphic designer when they need a billboard done for Mothers Against Drunk Driving or a flyer for the chief's advisory. Whatever there is, they need something done, they'll come to me. But my primary responsibility is responding to crime scenes and working crime scenes. When you think about it, when there's something that happens in Lynchburg that is of higher caliber or complicated evidence, they'll call me out. This year I've only been called out 24 times to date, but I've assisted in over 200 calls where I'm not the one that works the call, but I assist in collecting evidence. Our unit is responsible thus far for entering close to 700 items of evidence. Now, an item might be something very simple, like a fingerprint lift or a pen, or sometimes it can be something that takes you half a day to work on to properly collect it or process it. In addition to all that fun stuff, I do a lot of super glue fuming. Evidence that comes in, I use super glue to lock the prints in. I work with the lab closely. I do serial number restoration. I train students at the academy that are going through basic academy. I have fun with that. That's a lot of fun. And also in-house training, field techs, our unit. We have a training day every month. I'm responsible for organizing that. And just a lot of things. Two other things I really enjoy doing is the video analysis, the forensic analysis of video like surveillance tapes, and also the audio clarification. Forensic audio clarification, or enhancement is what they call it. And so these things come across my desk. I kind of got to stop what I'm doing. Even if you give me a Windex bottle and paper towel and say, hey, Pelletier, there's a spot on the window, I'll stop what I'm doing, I'm cleaning it, kind of a catch-all for anything anybody needs.
Yeah, but that's cool. I mean, I think that's really interesting. Now, you have a unit, and how is your unit structured?
We're part of CID, Criminal Investigation Division, and we have a captain, Captain Dance. And then we have a field lieutenant that works part-time as our lieutenant, and that's Christopher Diener. And then it's me. I'm the full-time guy. Under me, or that works with me, are full-time officers and detectives that work part-time crime scene. So there's 6 part-time crime scene guys that help share in the on-call responsibility, or help share when we have a big case and we have to jump in and work together. So there's myself and then 6 part-time.
It doesn't sound like a lot of people, because in my mind, I see this job as something that's just all-encompassing and taking up a lot of time.
It can be overwhelming at times, but you got to do your best, because you've got victims out there that deserve you to do your best, and the courts expect more, the juries expect more, they see CSI and they want more, and you've got to stay on top of the times and the technology, so it can be a little overwhelming sometimes.
I'm sure. Now, what's the difference between a crime scene investigator, an evidence technician, and a crime scene analyst?
It's kind of like slicing the same pie, and each piece is different, but it's the same. Analyst kind of comes from the International Association for Identification. That's their term they chose. Years ago, long before I was, they called them a glorified trash collector, because they'd be in there collecting clues and nobody helping them. Then it went to evidence technician, and now, if you said evidence technician, people really don't know what that is. So in keeping with the times and the media, we're crime scene investigators. So it's pretty much all the same, off the same pie, but a different way of looking at it.
Now, I read your bio, and it says that you're also lead instructor for crime scene investigation at Central Virginia Criminal Justice Academy, and you mentioned that briefly, but can you tell us what that involves?
That involves, it's one part of my job that's a reprieve from the day-to-day, never monotonous, but sometimes rigorous, and I get to go over right here on 12th Street, right above the 12th and Church, and right above the market, and they have the academy there, and I get to have fresh officers that are just in the basic school, all excited about learning everything. And they are there, I believe, 6 months learning so much. Well, I just go in and I teach them that little slice of crime scene. And they actually have practicals. We walk through several practicals, and by the end of about 8 days of training, they have a much better idea on how to collect, how to preserve, and how to send evidence to the lab.
I think it's fun.
We do this twice a year. We have 2 academies that go through, and we do that twice a year.
Now, you also told me before we got started that you teach CSI abroad.
Yes.
Now, where do you go and what's involved with that?
Linda, I take vacation time, and where sane people are up in a tree hunting or doing something,
Right.
being a little off in the head, a glutton for punishment, I work for the Department of Justice, a program that's been in existence for 20 years called ISATAP. And ISATAP is the International Criminal Investigation Training Program. They go into newly developing democracies and countries around the world, and they do the entire gamut of from A to Z, trying to develop professional and transparent law enforcement officers to cut down on corruption, cut down on terrorism. My only part is, again, that little slice of crime scene. I've been to Baku, Azerbaijan a couple times. Very interesting, great stories, experiences. I've been to Turkmenistan, in Ashgabat 3 times. Incredible experiences. But more recently, I've been to Nairobi, Kenya. And when you go there and you see the smiling faces, Mr. Jonathan, it is so good to see you. Welcome back, brother. You know, I'm like a brother in arms. They're so excited to see me, but they're hungry to learn. They know that information is knowledge, and knowledge and information can make their job easier. They can work faster. They can get better results. And there's nothing like watching TV or seeing a thing on the internet and you see in their hand a flashlight that you gave one of the detectives and he's using it properly like you showed him how to use it, and to see them using that equipment and then getting emails and phone calls is just so exciting because they're telling you how they caught this guy because of the training. So it's really rewarding. When I can, I take vacation and I head overseas, boot to ground.
So you use your own time and pay
Yes.
for this yourself, and I think that's wonderful. That sounds like a whole new show, a whole nother show for us. All right, now the labs that we work with,
Right.
with the evidence that's gathered here, where are they?
We have 4 in Virginia, and you're probably going to say, where are they and which one do we use? In Lynchburg, we use Roanoke.
Okay.
Roanoke Lab, and that's where the medical examiner is too. We've got one on the Tidewater area, one in Northern Virginia, brand new laboratory, and then Central's in Richmond. That's where I studied at the Forensic Academy.
Right.
They use their lab personnel and their ME, medical examiner personnel, to come in, and all their experts, the forensic experts, to come in and teach those in Richmond. But those are the 4 labs, and we use the one in Roanoke.
You know, I think we're very fortunate here in the Lynchburg area that we don't have a high crime
Right.
rate like you have in these larger metropolitan areas, but we do have it. So what kind of crimes do you most often investigate?
Well, I'll say this. There's no crime in a big metropolitan city that I know of that we don't have in Lynchburg, but to a much smaller scale.
Right.
Not as often a homicide, not as often, white-collar crimes that end up being billions. We have, maybe thousands of dollar embezzlement cases and things like this. We have it all, but on a smaller scale, which affords us, as the Lynchburg Police, to be able to put a lot of resources into the crime, rather than like
That's
Richmond,
great.
where you might have 5 homicides assigned to you in one day.
Right.
If we get a homicide, we can put a whole team on it, and we have a very high solvability rate.
You know, so many people are fans of shows like CSI and Dexter. How does what you do kind of equate to what we see on screen?
First time I saw CSI, I looked at the television and I'm like, wow, that is cool. I really want their job. And then it hit me, well, wait a minute, I have their job. It's that different. They do in 45 minutes, barring the commercials, what it takes myself and a team of other experts a year and a half or longer sometimes to bring them to justice. You watch that show, and by the end, the guy's arrested and locked up, and they don't show any of the paperwork. There's a lot of paperwork and a lot of boredom and a lot of downtime trying to work on a case.
I was thinking that there's some show I saw that somebody was passing paperwork along to somebody, but they seem to get through it really, really
Very
fast.
quick. Yeah.
All right, I'm sure that there's evidence associated with even the smallest crime. But routinely, what are you looking for?
That's a good question. The only answer that I can think of that would sum it up is we're looking for the triangle. And when I say triangle, we're looking for the link between the suspect, the victim, and the scene. Lockhart's principle, an age-old principle, is there's cross-transfer. You coming into this room, me coming into this room, we're going to leave something of ourselves, whether it be a fiber, a hair, a fingerprint. When we leave, we're going to take something with us. It's open to your imagination what that something is, but that's what you're looking for in every scene to make that triangle. And when you meet those dots, something matched from the scene to the suspect to the victim, that's when the arrest and later conviction comes about.
All right, physical tools that you use.
Physical tools. I can't think of any we haven't used. I mean, I've got a camera here that I really think is cool. I'll just pull this out. This is one I got off of eBay and converted to an infrared. This is a tool that we use. It's just a little Sony, and I can walk onto a scene and see infrared. We use UV light. We use everything from a hammer to a bulldozer, whatever we need, metal detectors. Very commonly, we'll use fingerprint brushes and powders and the common things that you see on TV, like the DNA swabs and so forth. But my toolkit is endless, and when I need something, I don't have it, we either rent it or find somebody that'll give it to us, whatever it takes to get the job done, cut out the evidence, remove the evidence, or carry the evidence, or dig up the evidence, whatever it takes. So the tools are endless.
That's very interesting to me. Now, do you ever actually come in contact with the perps?
Sure, I do. In fact, one of the responsibilities I didn't mention earlier, Linda, was that I'm also a detective that works cases. So in addition to all the CSI stuff, I'll get assigned cases, and I come into contact with the perps all the time. However, when it comes to CSI, a lot of times it's when I get in there and I start seeing the evidence telling me something different than what they're telling the investigators, I'll go in and I'll talk to them and I'll confront them with the evidence. One example, about 8 years ago, Linda Kirkland was brutally murdered in Lynchburg. The suspect, Kumalo, he said, no, I wasn't there. And I showed him physical evidence of his handprint, a handprint in blood on the victim that matched the size and shape, even down to the folds of skin and the contour of his thumb. And when I showed him that, he said, okay, I was there, and later changed his story to he was trying to give her CPR, and that's how his handprint. So when the evidence tells me something different, I'll often go into the interview room and confront the victim, confront the perpetrator, the suspect, and show them what I have and what I'm about to send to the lab, and then all of a sudden their story will change.
I'm sure. I think that's really interesting. Now, we have an occasional murder here.
Yes.
Like in a drive-by shooting, what would you be looking for first with that?
Well, our murder rate in Lynchburg, I'll say, is low compared to most any other place. It's a safe community. Right. It really is. I mean, we've gone a couple years without any murders, and the most I know of is 12. That would be the highest murder rate. We average between 5 and 6. This year we've had 4. Some people would argue 5. I would say 4, the case being. But when you look at the drive-by shooting question, what would you be looking for? You get on a scene, you're always open to anything, but specifically what you often find are cartridge casings, the brass that gets ejected. You find the bullets by digging them out of the wall, hopefully not digging them out of the hospital in surgery or the autopsy with the medical examiner, but the bullets, the cartridge casings. You're also looking to document the location of everything and the trajectory to be able to figure out where they were standing. Oftentimes when I can't find casings, when we do the trajectory, it leads us right to the casings. And when we don't find the casings, sometimes it's because they were using a revolver, which doesn't spit the cartridge casing out. It remains in the cylinder, and that can often lead to more information. So we look for a lot of things. Once it's all said and done, we're looking for the gun. We're looking to use what's called NIBIN, the National Integrated Ballistic Identification Network. That big thing is through ATF. All it is they feed in those little brass cartridge casings, and it will associate, let's say, a shooting that occurred in California being associated with the same gun of a shooting that occurred in Lynchburg. And then they furnish us that information, cool. And it is. We've had 2 of those NIBIN hits just last month.
I think that really is incredible to me that this is out there. And you just said something, and I was going to ask you a question about it later, but I'm going to ask you now. On these television programs, you see these people, and they're trying to find out where the gunshot came from, and they have all these little laser lights and
Yes.
things that they measure. Is that just for television, or do you actually have stuff like that?
No. In fact, for years we've been using lasers in trajectory. Instead of using a bright orange rope or thread or yarn or whatnot, you can often line up the trajectory pole or pointer and turn the laser on, and it will give you a line of sight showing you approximation of where the suspect could be standing, a span of what would be possible. If it's 10 feet up in the air, you know he's not standing there. And if it's 3 feet off the ground, more than likely he's not squatting. So you look in that range, and the lasers are used a lot. I used a laser pointer, pretty powerful one, on one of our more recent homicides that happened downtown, just to show the line of sight from the shooters to the victims, to show they had a clear line of sight. So we do use that stuff.
I just think that's fascinating.
It can be fun.
I would love to go with you. Maybe I'll get Phil to do a remote with you one day. All right. You know, of course, we hear DNA evidence is so important, and how important is that in what you do?
Monday, I was at the memorial service for Dr. Paul Ferrara. He was the founder, the father, the pioneer of databanks, DNA databanks in America. He was the first one to train people, bring them to Virginia. Virginia's a pioneer. We're the maverick, and start a databank whereby we can catch a criminal. DNA is so important today. I don't know how they did it without it.
I can't imagine.
We can walk onto scenes and collect DNA, and it's no longer just blood. It used to be serology. You had to have blood. It can be saliva, other bodily fluids, even touch. We're getting touch DNA from things people touched that are solving our crimes. And that brings so much safety to a community to lock up a dangerous offender, and so much closure to families that have had something tragic happen and at one point had no idea who did it, and then the DNA hit comes back and they're able to close that case and put that person away. What closure that brings. So it's extremely important.
And it also protects the person who's not guilty.
That's exactly right. There's been over 200 exonerated since the DNA has advanced, over 200 that I've read about. And that article that I read was 4 years old, so there's probably closer to 300 that have been let out or exonerated, proven innocent because of DNA.
You know, I think that, I mean, I just think that that's so wonderful that that tool's available.
It is.
Now, another tool. How important is fingerprint evidence? And you gave me some initials, and I looked it up. Automated fingerprint identification system, and do we have one of those here?
Okay. First, how important is fingerprint evidence?
Right.
It's incredibly important. It is so useful and so helpful that, and so reliable. Even though a lot of people continue to attack fingerprint evidence, it's so reliable that I can't speak enough about it. But I'll say that the automated system that can give you an answer in a matter of minutes is something we don't have. We're the largest department in the state that does not have one. A lot of smaller departments have it. When we had this case on Christmas where a man's home was invaded, we developed a print on his check, and he had to go through 2,612 pictures before he pointed the man out and the fingerprint was matched. But speaking of fingerprints, I'd like you to get a chance to develop a fingerprint. A very, very dangerous criminal touched this piece of paper.
All right.
And what we have here is a wand. I'm going to give you this, and what I'm going to ask you to do is take the magnetic wand and just dip it into the magnetic powder, and then just kind of brush the paper and see if you can't get, see if you can't get some prints. It was touched earlier today. See if you can't get some prints. There we go. They're popping right up.
Wow.
Very, very cool. And see, if we had an automated fingerprint identification system, we could feed this directly into it and get an investigative lead. What we have to do
Can everybody see this?
Yeah.
Let's see if I can turn this up.
Okay. What we do now is send it to Roanoke, and it's taken as long as a year in the past. Now they're turning around as quick as 6 weeks. But it's a lot of fun to be able to catch somebody based on fingerprints.
I may have a whole new career opportunity ahead of me.
You did good. You did good.
That was fun to do.
That's great.
Okay, we only have about 4 more minutes,
Okay.
believe it or not. These shows go by so fast, and I still have like 100 questions to ask you. But tell me why you think the television programs are so interesting to people.
In a nutshell, we're a humankind that thrives for justice, and we want truth. And these shows not only give you that every time you watch it, the bad guy gets caught, but they give it to you by taking you along a trail of neat gadgets and really good technology, so it makes it fun, and they don't show much work.
Do you work with the medical examiner?
I do. When we have a suspicious death investigation, we go to Roanoke. We're there sharing everything we know about the case, and they share everything they know about the body. They have to determine the cause and manner, and a lot of that cause is contingent on us, and the manner is contingent on us as well. So when they make a decision, they're looking at the entire case.
Okay. Have time for about 2 more questions. I wanted to ask you, evidence that's gathered, where is it stored?
It's at the police department, and it's stored indefinitely, and it stays in good shape. If it's packaged well, it could last for years.
If anybody were interested in a career choice like yours, tell them what they would do to go about doing that.
If you don't want to be a police officer, but you want to be a CSI person, a word of caution, there's a lot of programs. You can walk out of college with a degree, and it can be tough to find a job because there's a lot of colleges and universities that will hand you the degree, but there's not a lot of departments that are hiring civilians. There are departments like Hampton. They have, I think, 6 civilians that work CSI. But the one caution I would have is, what are you going to do in 8 years or 10 years when you're burned out? When you're tired of going on crime scenes at 2 in the morning and seeing, bloodshed, and you're burned out. When I'm burned out, I can go back to the field. I can work canine. I can apply for tech. I can apply for all these other things, personnel and training, and I still have the same job. When you're a civilian, you've got to really ask yourself, do I want to go down this track? And you don't want to become a cop in order to become a CSI. You want to become a crime scene investigator, and you want to become a police officer. You want to make sure you don't put the cart before the horse. You don't want to become a police officer in order to do CSI, unless you want to be a police officer.
I thank you so much for coming. This is
Sure.
such an informative show, and I wish we had time to answer these other 100 questions that I had. Thank you again.
It's been good. It's my pleasure. Thank you, Linda.
I hope you all have enjoyed tonight's show, and we'll tune in for part 2, which will feature forensics nurse examiners. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful evening. Good night.